The rooftop felt alive that night. New Year's Eve in downtown Austin always does. But the moment my brother Evan opened his mouth, the air snapped like a cracked wire. We were all gathered around a long table overlooking the skyline, champagne in hand, ready to count down the last 30 seconds of the year. I had just finished answering my cousin Riley's question about whether I'd moved into my new place yet. "Yeah," I said casually, taking a sip. "The condo in downtown Dallas, closed last month, around $1.2 million. The words hadn't even settled when Evan shoved his chair back so hard it screeched across the cement. His voice came out sharp enough to slice straight through the music. $1.2 million? Maya, what did you scam someone for? Who did you steal from to afford that?" His champagne flute slipped from his hand, hit the ground, and burst into shards that glittered in the string lights. The conversations around us died instantly. Even the DJ seemed to sense something was wrong and lowered the volume without being asked. Mom's smile vanished mid-laugh. Dad's hand froze halfway to his mouth, fork still hovering over a piece of steak. Riley's eyes widened, her phone dimming in her hand as her half-typed text disappeared. And me? I just sat there, staring at my brother, my parents' golden child, while the familiar burn of humiliation crawled up my throat. For a moment, the world shrank down to the sound of fireworks warming up in the distance, the Texas wind brushing past my shoulders, and the heavy silence pressing against our table. Then Uncle Ben slowly pushed his chair back, his jaw tight. When he stood, his voice came out low, but unmistakably clear. "Linda, Robert, you've been breaking Maya since she was 8 years old, and somehow you still don't see it." The entire table froze as if someone had hit pause on all of us. My parents, who had spent my entire life pretending everything was fair enough, looked suddenly painfully small under the rooftop lights. And this was the moment I had spent 3 decades trying to avoid. The moment when the quiet wounds, the brushed-off achievements, the unequal birthdays, the split worlds of opportunity, all of it would finally catch up. But before I go any further, I want to say something to whoever is listening right now. If you've ever been the overlooked kid, the one who had to be strong, the one who received less because your sibling needed more, hit like, subscribe, and share your story in the comments. I read every one, and trust me, your voice deserves space. This was the night my family shattered in real time, and it didn't happen because of the condo, or the money, or even Evan's accusation. It happened because silence can only hold so much weight before it breaks. I looked around the table, at the relatives who always noticed the imbalance but never spoke up, at the parents who loved me in the way that was convenient for them, and at the brother who had been handed my childhood wrapped in gold paper. The clock ticked down to 20 seconds. Under the glow of Austin's skyline, I felt every ignored accomplishment flash through my mind like a reel of old film. The scholarship no one asked about, the late-night shifts during high school, the small birthday parties, the college graduation I paid for myself, the promotions I announced through text because calls never came. Every memory pulled tighter and tighter until finally it snapped. I set my glass down. The sound was soft, but it felt enormous. "You want to know how I afforded it, Evan?" I said, my voice steady in a way that surprised even me. "Then let's talk about everything no one cared to ask." Fireworks began to rise behind us as the clock hit 10 seconds, but no one looked up. They were all looking at me, and for the first time in my life, I was ready to let them. When I finally opened my mouth to speak, the first place my mind went wasn't the condo or the accusation, or even Evan's voice still echoing in my ears. It went all the way back to Dayton, Ohio, back to the tiny 2-story house with the fading green shutters where the imbalance began, long before any of us had the language to name it. I was 8 when my parents first told me Evan needed a little extra. He was 5, sweet, shy, and easily overwhelmed.
I remember Mom kneeling beside me in the kitchen, explaining in a soft voice that Evan would get more attention because he struggled socially and needed every advantage. She said it with so much warmth that I almost felt guilty for asking why. By middle school, a little extra had turned into an entire world built around him. When Dad announced that Evan would be transferring to Dayton Academy, a private school with bright hallways, polished floors, and guidance counselors who knew every student's name, I clapped for him. Everyone did. They told me he needed the structure. They told me it would help his confidence. Nobody asked me how I felt staying behind at Lincoln Middle, where the lockers jammed, the textbooks were older than the teachers, and the cafeteria microwaves sparked every other Wednesday. I adapted. I always adapted. When I turned 14, I got a job bagging groceries at Miller's Market. At 15, I added a weekend shift at the local diner. I told my parents I liked having my own money, and part of me did. But mostly I hated being the only kid in my class who had to buy her own binders, her own art supplies, her own everything. Meanwhile, Evan had a private math tutor who came twice a week, a club soccer team that required $1,000 fees, and summer programs in Michigan that promised confidence-building experiences for growing boys. I remember watching him load his suitcase into the car the first time he left for camp. Mom cried. Dad hugged him like he was shipping off to war. When I left for my first day of high school, Mom handed me a granola bar on her way out the door and said, "You'll be fine. You always are." That was the refrain of my childhood. You don't need help. You're strong. You're fine. But strength isn't something you're born with. It's something you develop because you have no other choice. My 16th birthday drew the line deeper. Evan's Sweet 16 had been held at a country club, DJ, catered buffet, ice sculpture, and a brand new Ford Escape sitting outside with a bow on the hood. 3 years later, my birthday was a cardboard box of takeout pizza, a store-bought cake, and 4 friends squeezed into our living room. Dad left early to watch a game. Mom snapped one quick picture, said something about laundry, and disappeared down the hallway. The gift they handed me, a used laptop from Craigslist, was something I'd helped choose. They said they were proud of how independent I'd always been. But independence isn't praise. Most of the time, it's abandonment in nicer packaging. I don't think my parents ever meant to hurt me, I really don't. But favoritism rarely looks like cruelty from the inside. It looks like supporting the child who needs it most. It looks like love, but only when you squint. And standing on that rooftop years later, staring into their stunned faces, I finally realized something. They had never seen me struggle, because they had never bothered to look. By the time I left for college, the pattern wasn't just familiar, it was permanent, like a stain everyone pretended not to see. I earned a full-ride scholarship to Ohio State University, something most families would have framed and hung on a wall. Mine treated it like a convenient discount. "That's great, honey," Mom had said, waving a receipt in her hand. "It really frees up money for Evan's tuition." And it did. They poured everything into sending him to Arizona State, out-of-state tuition, luxury dorm with a private study suite, a new MacBook so he could stay organized, therapy sessions to help him adjust socially, weekend flights home when he got overwhelmed, a car they shipped to him because he shouldn't rely on public transit. Meanwhile, I worked night shifts at the campus library and woke up at 5 a.m. to open the coffee shop on High Street. I shared a room with 2 other girls in an off-campus apartment where the heat rattled like it was giving its last warning. Every month, Mom would call to update me on how Evan was finding himself in college. Every month, she never asked how I was. I made Dean's List my first semester. No one mentioned it, not once. But when Evan got a B+ in Intro to Communications, they bought him noise-canceling headphones and took him out for a celebratory dinner when he flew home. It didn't stop there. Sophomore year, Evan decided he hated his major. He switched to digital media, then back to communications, then briefly considered psychology because a girl he liked was in the program. Each change required new fees, new books, new equipment, new advisors, new schedules. And every time he panicked, Mom and Dad were on the next flight to Phoenix. When he failed a class because he never showed up, they blamed the professor for being too demanding. When he forgot to submit a financial aid form, Dad blamed the university for not reminding him enough. Evan's mistakes were always someone else's fault. My achievements were always expected. The final punch came the summer before my senior year. I landed a competitive internship at a financial firm in Chicago, something I fought tooth and nail for. I was terrified to tell my parents, hoping maybe, finally, they'd recognize the magnitude of it. Instead, Mom just said, "Chicago? That's far. Who's going to help Evan move into his new apartment?" I swear for a second I thought she was joking. But she wasn't. She genuinely believed my biggest concern at that moment should have been whether my grown brother had someone to help him unpack. That was the first time anger, not resentment, not hurt, but real, shaking anger filled my chest. It caught fire again the day I overheard Dad telling my aunt at Thanksgiving, "Yeah, Evan's the one with all the potential. Maya's just steady, reliable. She's fine." Fine. The word I'd been smothered under since childhood. Reliable, because I never asked for anything. Steady, because no one cared enough to see me wobble. Fine, because they never believed I needed support. That Thanksgiving, Evan announced he was switching majors again. He wanted to pursue film. My parents reacted like he'd just discovered a cure for something. A week later, he called crying because he didn't understand the software required for his new program. Dad overnighted a $3,000 editing laptop. Mom paid for a private filmmaking mentor she found through Facebook. When I called the next day to tell them I'd been offered a part-time analyst position after graduation, Dad said, "That's nice," and then shifted to telling me about Evan's meetup with an indie director. It hit me like a slap. They were raising him to believe the world owed him everything, and raising me to believe I didn't deserve anything at all. By the time Evan graduated, 1 year late, my parents had spent close to 6 figures supporting his journey, and they still believed they hadn't done enough. Meanwhile, I entered my career with pride, exhaustion, and a boiling truth simmering under my ribs. It wasn't that Evan needed more, it was that I was expected to survive with less, and survival, no matter how quiet, leaves scars. When I entered the workforce, I thought things would finally feel different. I imagined adulthood as a clean slate, a place where hard work actually mattered, where effort translated into acknowledgement, where I could finally outrun the shadows that shaped my childhood. But the thing about being overlooked for so long is this. You start thinking invisibility is normal. You start believing it's your job to carry the weight quietly. My first year working in Columbus was brutal in ways I didn't expect. I was an entry-level financial analyst, long hours, low pay, and constant pressure to prove myself. I ate dinner at my desk more nights than I can count. Some evenings, I was so exhausted I fell asleep still wearing my blazer. And through all of it, my parents barely noticed. They called, yes, but only to update me on how Evan was doing. He's struggling again. He's thinking of changing jobs. He's worried he made the wrong career choice. He doesn't know if Arizona is the right fit. Every call felt like another reminder. Their emotional universe revolved around him, not me. The breaking point came one night in early spring. I had just gotten off a 12-hour shift, my eyes burning from staring at spreadsheets all day. My phone buzzed. Mom. For a second, I hoped she was calling to check on me, to ask how work was going, to tell me she was proud. Instead, the first words out of her mouth were, "Do you think you could help Evan edit his resume?" I laughed, a bitter, tired sound I couldn't swallow back. Mom, I'm drowning at work. Did you even ask how I'm doing? Silence. A long, uncomfortable silence. Then, softly, almost dismissively, she said, "Honey, you've always been strong. Evan's the one who needs support. there it was again. Strong. The word that excused every absence, every oversight, every wound they never intended but still caused. I hung up after that call and sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the wall, feeling something inside me crack. Not loudly, not dramatically, just quietly, like a hairline fracture spreading through glass. It wasn't anger this time, it was grief. Grief for all the birthdays I pretended didn't hurt. Grief for the accomplishments I celebrated alone. Grief for the mother who never asked if I was tired. Grief for the father who only bragged about one child, and it wasn't me. For a long time, I told myself it was fine, that families weren't perfect, that some kids just got more attention. But sitting there in that dim apartment, the refrigerator humming in the background, I realized something devastating. I had never been their priority. Not once, not ever. The next few months felt like moving through fog. I worked, I slept. I woke up and worked again. My friends invited me out, but I always declined. My body was running, but my spirit had stalled somewhere back in that phone call, sitting in the ashes of a childhood I never fully processed. And the worst part? I didn't know how to fix it. I didn't know if it could be fixed. What do you do when the people who were supposed to see you never did? Back then, I didn't have an answer. All I knew was that something needed to change, but I had no idea that the change would begin with me and that it would transform my life in ways none of us could have imagined. The shift didn't happen overnight. It rarely does. Healing isn't a dramatic movie montage. It's small decisions that accumulate until suddenly you're no longer the same person you were. For me, the shift began on a Wednesday morning. I remember sitting in my cubicle before dawn, a cup of burnt office coffee cooling beside my laptop. I was reviewing numbers, the same routine I'd done 1,000 times before, when my supervisor stopped by. She placed a file on my desk, tapped the cover, and said, "You've got an eye for this. You ever think about doing more?" It was the first time in a long time someone had looked at me and actually seen capability, not resilience. Recognition, not expectation. 6 months later, I accepted a position at a venture capital firm in Dallas. It was terrifying. New city, new job, new everything. But something inside me whispered, try. So I did. And Dallas changed me. The pace was faster, the expectations were higher, but for the first time in my life, I wasn't simply managing, I was thriving. I learned to negotiate, to trust my instincts, to pitch ideas without shrinking. I started investing small amounts from each paycheck, exchange-traded funds first, then individual stocks, then eventually real estate. Every year, my confidence grew alongside my portfolio. Meanwhile, Evan's path looked different. He moved from job to job, city to city, always calling home when things got rough. And Mom and Dad always answered, always fixed, always funded. But I wasn't watching with resentment anymore. I was too busy building something of my own. By year 4 in Dallas, I had been promoted twice. By year 6, I was leading deals. By year 8, I was being recruited by other firms. People wanted me, something I'd never truly felt before. And then came the offer that changed everything: Vice President. The title itself didn't change my life. What changed me was the moment I walked into my new corner office, glass walls, sunlight pouring in, the Dallas skyline stretching beyond the horizon, and realized I had built this. Me. Without shortcuts, without lifelines, without being anyone's priority. I bought my first condo soon after, a 1-bedroom in Uptown. I renovated it, filled it with plants and books and quiet afternoons that didn't feel lonely. Then, last fall, I upgraded to the condo Evan would later accuse me of stealing, a $1.2 million place overlooking downtown Dallas. Floor-to-ceiling windows, a balcony with sunrise views, a kitchen so sleek I barely recognized it as mine. I walked into that empty condo the day I closed, set my keys on the quartz counter, and felt something powerful settle in my chest. Not pride, not revenge, but peace. For once, I didn't need my parents to notice anything. I didn't need them to clap or congratulate or even ask questions. I had finally become the person I once prayed someone would see in me. That growth came with a new kind of strength, not the forced independence of childhood, but the earned confidence of someone who knows her worth. So when I stepped onto that Austin rooftop months later, surrounded by champagne flutes and twinkling lights, I wasn't the invisible daughter anymore. I was a woman who had rebuilt herself from the inside out, and I no longer needed permission to take up space. But I had no idea my brother's words would pull the entire past into the present, forcing the truth into the open. And I had no idea that the strength I'd earned was about to become the shield I needed.
The rooftop had gone silent. So silent I could hear the faint crackle of fireworks preparing to launch somewhere near Ladybird Lake. Evan's accusations still hung in the air like smoke, and every pair of eyes at the table was glued to me. For the first time in my life, I didn't swallow the hurt. I didn't look away. I didn't play the strong one. Instead, I breathed in, steady and slow, and let the truth rise. "You want to know how I afforded it?" I said, my voice calm enough to unsettle him. "Then let's talk about everything you never bothered to ask." Evan shifted in his seat, but I didn't give him time to react. "Let's talk about birthdays," I continued. "Your 16th at a country club with a DJ and a brand new SUV waiting outside. Mine, 3 years later, with a frozen pizza and a used laptop I had to help choose." A few relatives exchanged glances. This was news to them. "Let's talk about school," I said, my voice sharpening. "You went to Dayton Academy, private tutors, summer camps, a laptop upgrade every year. And me, I bagged groceries to buy my own notebooks." A fuss scoffed under his breath, but Uncle Ben shot him a glare that shut him up instantly. "Let's talk about college." That one hit harder. Mom flinched. "You had out-of-state tuition fully covered. They flew to Arizona every time you had a meltdown. You switched majors 4 times, each one more expensive than the last. And when you didn't understand your software, Dad overnighted a $3,000 editing laptop to you." I leaned forward, my hands steady. "Meanwhile, I worked 2 jobs, made Dean's List, earned a competitive internship, graduated with honors, and no one asked how I was doing. Not once." My voice cracked, not from weakness, but from the weight of speaking out loud what I'd carried for decades. "Every crisis of yours was treated like an emergency. Every achievement of mine was met with, 'That's great, honey.' And then the conversation went right back to you." Evan's face twisted, purple creeping along his neck. "So what? You think you're better than me now? You think your stupid condo means anything?" I held his stare. "No," I said. "My life means something because I built it. You were handed everything, and you still lost control of the wheel." A low murmur rippled around the table. Mom finally spoke, her voice trembling. "Maya, we never meant to make you feel—" "I know you didn't mean to, but meaning doesn't erase impact." Dad looked down, his shoulders sinking as if he were absorbing the weight of every decision he had made without realizing its consequences. Evan slammed his hand onto the table, rattling the glasses. "You're acting like some victim. You had everything. You were smart, you had scholarships." "Because I had no other option," I replied quietly. "You were supported. I survived." Silence struck again, this time heavier. Riley, who'd been watching with wide eyes, whispered, "Oh my God, we never knew." "Of course you didn't, because even in my own family, I wasn't the story." Uncle Ben spoke next, his voice a steady anchor. "She's telling the truth. I saw it all, and I tried to speak up back then, but your parents shut me down every time." Mom's breath hitched. Dad rubbed his temples. Evan stood up abruptly, knocking his chair to the ground. "You're all insane," he spat. "I don't need this." And with that, he stormed toward the elevator, shoulders rigid, jaw clenched, the city lights flickering across his face like a warning he refused to see. He didn't even wait for the doors to close before shouting one last time, "You think you've won, Maya? You're nothing without this family." The doors slid shut. I exhaled, not in triumph,
but in release. But consequences don't wait. They unfold. 3 months later, everything reversed. Evan's job at a gallery fell through when funding dried up. His credit cards maxed out. Equipment leases, impulsive purchases, unpaid bills. Landlord sent an eviction notice. The leased car was repossessed. Mom and Dad tried to keep up, like they always had, sending money, making payments, trying to save him one more time. But this time, they drowned with him. They sold the Dayton house at a loss, moved into a cramped one-bedroom in San Antonio. Mom took early retirement because stress wrecked her health. Dad downsized his insurance business to part-time. Their entire financial life had been poured into patching Evan's never-ending holes. And Evan? He couch-surfed in Austin, delivering food on a bike, scraping by. Meanwhile, I launched my venture fund in Dallas. It took off faster than I expected. $12 million under management by the end of the first quarter. Justice isn't always loud. Sometimes it's simply watching the scales finally balance themselves. And for the first time, I wasn't the forgotten child. I was the one who walked away and flourished. In the months after that rooftop confrontation, something inside me settled in a way I hadn't expected. Not triumph. Nothing about this felt like victory. And not bitterness either. Just clarity. A quiet, steady understanding of everything that had led me here. I didn't cut my family off right away. It happened slowly, like a frayed rope finally giving way. The first boundary was blocking Evan's number. Even without calling, he leaked chaos. Late-night texts, dramatic rants, accusations that I'd ruined the family. Cutting that off was like turning off an alarm that had been ringing my whole life. A week later, I muted the family group chat. Watching message after message revolve around Evan's latest crisis had always been painful. Now it was simply irrelevant. Then came the final step. One afternoon in early spring, I sat in my Dallas condo, the same one Evan had accused me of stealing. Sunlight spilling across the hardwood floors, city humming quietly below me. Something inside me just clicked. I opened my phone, tapped Mom's contact, then Dad's, and pressed block. Not out of anger, not out of revenge, but out of self-preservation. For 30 years, I'd been living in a story where my role was written for me. The strong one, the reliable one, the background character in her own life. I didn't hate them for it, not anymore. People parent with the tools they have, even when those tools are dull, uneven, or broken. But loving them didn't mean sacrificing myself, and walking away didn't mean I stopped caring. It just meant I finally cared about me too. In the quiet that followed, something surprising happened. I started sleeping better, laughing louder, thinking of my achievements without shrinking. My venture fund grew quickly. Investors trusted me. Founders sought me out. I filled my condo with warm lights, fresh flowers, and the kind of softness I'd never allowed myself to have before. Healing wasn't dramatic. It was subtle. It was buying myself a good coffee on a hard morning. It was taking myself out to dinner just because. It was no longer waiting for a validation that was never coming. As for my parents, word reached me through extended family. They were adjusting to their new life in San Antonio. Tight budgets, smaller space, quieter routines. For the first time, they were living without the illusion that Evan's potential would save them. And Evan? He was still searching for himself, drifting between odd jobs, still expecting the world to bend around him. I didn't wish him harm, I just finally understood his life wasn't mine to fix. But if there's one thing this entire journey taught me, it's this. Favoritism doesn't just wound the child left behind, it cripples the child who's placed on a pedestal, and in the end, the entire family pays the price. I stood on my balcony one evening, watching the Dallas lights flicker like embers across the skyline. I thought about that rooftop night in Austin, the glass shattering, the words that cracked open decades, the truth spilling like smoke. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel invisible. I didn't feel overlooked. I didn't feel fine. I felt free. So if you're listening to my story right now, if any part of this echoes something you've lived through, then hear this. You're not ungrateful for wanting fairness. You're not dramatic for wanting to be seen, and you're not wrong for walking away from a family that refuses to see your worth. Thank you for staying with me until the end. If this story resonated with you, share your thoughts in the comments. I read every one. And don't forget to like and subscribe. There are more stories coming, and maybe one of them will help you feel less alone.